here we are in Liverpool. Welcome to Question Time. Good evening, welcome to our audience here who will be putting the questions, and to our panel who, I swear to God, do not know what the questions are until they're asked them by the panel, by the audience, despite what people say. Our panel is the Conservative Education Minister Liz Truss, Labour's Shadow Energy Secretary Caroline Flint, the President of the Liberal Democrats Tim Farron, the Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens, and the author of the book Chavs, Owen Jones. Now, we'll take our first question from Joy Boyd, please.
Should the government introduce a windfall tax, ditch green levies, or should we just wear more jumpers?
Should we just wear more jumpers? Well, this is the third time we've discussed this, and it comes up all the time because the picture keeps changing. Peter Hitchens.
None of those things. What the government should do is abandon the ridiculous drive towards green energy, which is the main part of this price increase which we can control. We can't control the world price of energy, but we can get rid of this crazy system of milking the public to subsidise landowners and others to build useless windmills, which most of the time don't produce any power anyway, and which are only there to serve a mistaken dogma about man-made global warming.
How much could you bring down the price of energy? If you had your way, how much would it bring the price down?
One of the things, I couldn't give you an exact figure, but I think probably probably I would guess 50 or 60 pounds of an average bill would come off as a result of those things. But what is much more important is far more will come off, because all these green levies and things like the carbon floor tax are due to hit even more heavily on the public in the next few years than they are now. That part of your electricity and gas bill is due to go up. And at the same time, this country is risking serious energy problems, because here we are, a country sitting on huge piles of coal, which refuses to burn it on the grounds that it will create global warming. Well, China, for instance, builds another couple of coal-fired power stations every month.
Do you think we should reopen coal mining?
I think we probably should. It is the cheapest form of energy. It's one we produce ourselves. It's absolutely absurd to deprive ourselves of, and as we're doing at the moment, we have shut down, and are in the course of shutting down more perfectly efficient coal-fired power stations in this country, not because they don't work, but because of European Union regulations which force us to do this crazy thing.
OK. Tim Farron.
Well, I mean, politicians who talk about putting an extra jumper on are politicians who've never known what it's like to have to work hard to get next week's rent and to pay the bills, and so that's an outrageous suggestion to make. When it comes to the green levies, it's really important to remember what they actually pay for. They pay for the 2 million lowest income households to have 135 quid off their energy bills. They pay for the insulation.
But those aren't green levies, those are redistribution.
It's absolutely, but it's
why
about...
do you call them green levies?
But it comes under that. It also includes the money that we give to elderly people to insulate their homes.
Yeah, but that's not what they're talking about.
And it's fair.
Yeah.
And the element of the green levies that people talk about, you know, it's not about windmills. It's about making sure that people in this city have jobs in green manufacturing. If we're concerned about our children today, we've got to be concerned about our children tomorrow and in the future as well. Climate change is absolutely happening. It is the single biggest threat that this country faces in the decades to come. And if we don't face up to it, then our legacy will be trashed.
So what's your policy for the general complaint that prices have gone up by 8 to 10%?
We have the weakest and most useless of all the regulators looking after our energy sector. Ofgem is pathetic in the extreme. Ofwat, the water regulator, is able to prevent water companies putting up their prices more than once every 5 years. Recently, Thames Water tried to put theirs up by 8% and was stopped by Ofwat. If you've got a watchdog like Ofgem that has got no tooth, no bite and no bark, you put that flaming watchdog down and you replace it with one that can genuinely cut prices.
Okay. Liz Truss.
Well, I grew up in a house where my dad was constantly telling me to put a jumper on and turning the heating off. And once the pipes froze because it was so cold and we got flooded. So, you know, there is a limit to what you can do with a jumper. And
we do need... more should be done with jumpers there?
Well, I'm just saying there is a limit, and we do need
obviously there's a limit, but do you think people
energy.
should take the advice of wearing an extra jumper, like Number 10 said at one point last week?
Well, I don't think it's about jumpers. This is about how expensive energy is and the fact that gas prices doubled under the previous government because we didn't see investment in new power sources. And we've just signed a deal on Hinkley Point, which will mean that there is new energy coming forward in 2023.
Nuclear.
But we've had years and years of a lack of investment, a lack of a clear energy strategy. And yes, you know, coal is important in the short term. We also need to get gas going. We need to make sure we've got shale gas being exploited in this country, which will benefit local communities. We also need to look at liquid. We also need to look at liquid natural gas. And one of my previous jobs was working in liquid natural gas shipping, where you can sign in long-term contracts. But we do need to look at the green taxes to be able to do that, because at the moment they are incentivising particular forms of energy that are extremely expensive. And that's why the government...
You talk about gas.
We've already reduced...
You talk about gas. No one's taking up this point about the green levies because they're all...
I'm just about to say it before you interrupted me.
Well, the point about the gas is we have to import increasing amounts of it because we no longer make our own. And we have to import it to run power stations, to provide power for the enormous amounts of time when the windmills don't work because, have you guessed it, the wind isn't blowing.
OK, all right. What's your point about rolling back the green taxes that the Prime Minister said he was going to do? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I would like to see that because I think it's wrong that we're implementing green taxes faster than other countries. We may be potentially exporting jobs out of our country because energy is so expensive. These policies were put in place by Ed Miliband. These policies were put in place by Ed Miliband.
You voted for them.
Nonsense. You voted for them all.
These policies were put in place.
Not everybody wants.
The Prime Minister has said that he wants to review them because he now feels that we are moving faster than other countries and it's potentially damaging to our economy. It's absolutely not. It's absolutely sensible economics when people are facing high costs of energy prices. We're taking the action that Labour didn't take. A nuclear power station has not been built since 1995. We all knew these problems were in the pipeline for years and years. Labour did nothing to put the new energy supplies in place. They did nothing to do any nuclear power, which is a renewable source. Gas has half the emissions of coal to be able to still hit our carbon targets. But I think there are better ways to hit the green targets which are important.
Which are what?
Will deliver, well, investing in nuclear, investing in shale gas will help us achieve those targets.
Perhaps the public would be more supportive of green taxes if we knew that that would then generate more jobs in the future.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Caroline Flint.
Well, first of all, to Joy, what we've witnessed in the last 24 hours is David Cameron once again making up policy on the hoof. He's in a panic. He is clearly sensing there is a huge public discontent with the way their bills are rising in the last few weeks, but also the last 3 years. We've seen £300 go on bills. And you know what, Liz? Actually, the House of Commons Library has confirmed that bills are going up 3 times faster since the general election.
Labour.
3 times faster since the general election under this government. And let me be clear about something. What we are witnessing here is a Prime Minister who is using green levies, and of course we've got to have value for money, and of course we should get jobs out of it. But he's using these green levies as an excuse for not standing up to these energy companies and the way they operate. He hasn't got the bottle to do
Can I just make a point on that?
Wait a minute, Caroline. He says your policies are a con trick, that you can't do it.
Well, he's flapping around because he hasn't got any. Let me be clear about what our policies are.
Is it a con trick or not?
It is not a con trick. What we said is, when we have looked at wholesale prices, not the green levies, but the wholesale prices, Peter, we looked at 2009. Wholesale prices dropped by 46%. We never saw that reflected in a reduction on our bills. And why is that? Because we have ended up, after decades since privatisation, with 6 companies dominating 98% of the market.
And when did that happen?
They create energy, sell it to themselves, sell it onto us. And the reason why they reduced was that John Major took away the restriction on separating generation from supply, which led to the big 6 we've got today. And something needs to be done about that. And Cameron is just not up to it. That's why we said we're
the number of... Just on this point, the number of companies dropped from 14 to 6 under Labour.
Because John Major...
Don't interrupt, please. Let people have a say.
They fell from 14 to 6 under Labour. What did Labour do to get high-quality, low-cost energy into our country? They say that we needed nuclear power stations. They didn't build anything. They didn't do anything to promote competition in the gas and energy markets, which we're now doing. Why did the number of companies fall? And now we've got 7 new entrants into the energy markets in the last 2 years.
Don't interrupt, Shella.
It's your legacy, Caroline. It's your legacy.
Caroline, just wait a moment. Let's hear from Owen Jones, and then 1 or 2 members of the audience. You hold the point you want to counter, and I'll let you do it.
Well, I find this new Tory war on green levies fascinating. Do you remember David Cameron pouncing around the Arctic, hogging huskies? Do you remember Vote Blue, Go Green? Do you remember the Tory party that changed their logo to a tree, and now they're waging all-out war against these environmental levies and the green jobs of the future? But just in terms of the first question, I think it's a really important question about how we deal with this crisis, and it is a crisis. I think it's fascinating because we heard this swivel-eyed talk, kind of neo-McCarthyite talk of socialism and Marxism because of a temporary price freeze, when actually, if you look at the polling, as far as the British people were concerned, what Ed Miliband was proposing was too moderate, because nearly 7 out of 10 want our energy supply back under the control of the British people in public ownership. And I'll tell you why that's so quickly. I'll tell you why that's the road we have to go down. Last year, the Big Six made £3.7 billion worth of profit. They're now hiking up their prices by, 10%? They're going to drive 9 million people into fuel poverty. That will be people lying awake at night, panicking about choosing between heating their homes and feeding their kids. And this is not hyperbole. People will die because of these price rises. Already, 20,000 elderly people die in excess winter deaths. Excess winter deaths, a horrible, macabre phrase. According to Age UK, you are 3 times more likely to die of preventable death in a cold home as a warm home.
Right, well,
for that reason, they have forfeited their right to control energy supply.
Why would nationalisation? You've heard all the discussion about shortages of fuel and all the rest of it. Why would nationalisation make any difference?
Because what would happen then is, instead of lining the profits of greedy shareholders and CEOs, the likes of whom, for example, are now building a £2 million mansion, using money squeezed from the bills of pensioners, freezing, literally, in some cases, to death in their homes.
2 million is not going to go very far in providing
for 6 to 6 million
people,
actually saving lives and actually having energy prices which people out there can afford.
The gentleman there has had his hand up for some time on the left of the audience there, you sir.
It's true that that the deal at Hinckley is brilliant for British jobs and British business, but it just astounds me that, given the comments the panel have made tonight, why the government haven't looked at the consumer side of the deal in as much depth as the other economics within the deal.
You mean you think the pricing of what the Hinckley is going to provide has not been thought about?
That's well, not as in depth as possibly the job creation issue.
Okay, and over there with the person with spectacles there, yes.
Why don't we just get rid of the green levy tax and put more money into nuclear and coal, because you're going to get far more jobs out of coal-fired power stations and nuclear power stations than you are going to get out of windmills, in a way.
Not in Germany. In Germany, they've created hundreds of thousands of renewable energy jobs. Those are the jobs of the future, green jobs.
Caroline Flint, I said I'd bring you in. Can you answer his point in your way?
Yeah, I mean, just as Owen was saying there, in Germany, 2/3 of energy generated, which is solar and wind, is actually coming from individuals and community-based organisations. And the truth is, we're apparently the windiest country in Europe. And it's not just about onshore, it's about offshore. And when I look at the places around our coastline that are looking to use offshore wind as a way of getting jobs and skills, it's an important part of the mix. Now, we need a mix, and I believe nuclear is part of that. I have to say, when we were discussing nuclear under the Labour government, David Cameron said it should be a last resort, and the Liberal Democrats were against using nuclear power. So they've come on a bit since then. We doubled renewable energy under the last government, and we need to do more. But investment in renewable has halved in the last 3 years.
Right.
It's about the mix, and it's about where we need to be in terms of being ahead of the curve on jobs, but also cleaner, cheaper energy in the long run.
Let's come back to the current problem and the winter ahead.
This point about nuclear power, Caroline's saying she's in favour of it. Why did Labour do nothing when they were in government? We've signed a deal which is more affordable. The electricity price is more affordable than wind power, both on and offshore.
Let's talk about the winter ahead and what's going to happen and what your party is going to do to help people who are in difficulty, as John Major put it, who are going to choose between heating and eating. What's your party going to do about it?
Well, we have a cold winter payment. We have the winter fuel allowance.
But all these policies that were suddenly announced in the House of Commons on Wednesday, are they going to take effect immediately, quickly? Are people going to see a reduction?
Well, I think it's very important that we do support families struggling to heat their homes.
How?
And we do find solutions.
What are you going to do for those elderly people freezing in their homes?
First of all, we're enabling people to get cheaper energy bills by asking companies to make sure people are on the lowest tariffs, which
but if everybody's putting up their prices,
we're
what's the point of that?
Well, not everybody is, and people are already switching to cheaper
You've slashed the money that was going to the fuel poor. The ECO, the energy company obligation.
I think it's an absolute cheek when you did nothing in office to create the supply that we need for affordable energy.
The other two-thirds
We're picking up the pieces of your mistakes.
To insulate their homes anyway.
Watching the two political parties handling our energy industry is like watching a drunken man running about with a Ming vase. These people have no idea what they're doing. The two political parties, the Tories by privatisation, breaking up the Central Electricity Generating Board, destroyed what was probably the most advanced and skilled centre of nuclear power generation in the world, and threw it away. Labour finished the process off by selling Westinghouse, so that we now have to go and beg the Chinese and the French to build nuclear power stations for us who pioneered civil nuclear power. It is so pathetic, it is almost beyond grief to expect something. None of them will be honest about the extent to which our policies are controlled by the European Union, which, as I say, is forcing us to close down perfectly serviceable coal-fired power stations, which actually means that as the power fails, which it will do as a result of this, great parks full of diesel generators, which are terribly eco-friendly, will have to be brought in to cover up the gaps. They don't know what they're doing. The question of this winter is, of course, important, but the real question is that between now and 2020, these insane green levies will push the prices of these insane green levies will push the prices of your gas and electricity up more and more and more, and these people won't even talk about it and won't do anything about it. They're all of this not minute, as people will find out. They are all of them committed to this green lunacy. Blame them, not me.
It's basic economics of demand and supply. There is insufficient supply of energy. It's not because of green levies. Green levies is about making sure we guarantee the future for our children and our children's children. And by the way, if you want to talk about
children's children,
correct,
you're not answering the question.
And the economic point, if you want to invest in green energy that will create real jobs in this city, 95% of the supply chain of tidal and hydro energy is completely and utterly British. Yeah. That's the way to create jobs.
Tim, would you like to see this spending on green energy come out of taxation, and therefore, by implication, the richer paying more than the poorer? Or are you happy to have it loaded onto the bills of everybody equally?
I'm not dogmatic about it. It's just
why not? Why aren't you dogmatic?
Because why should you be? I mean,
because it's a regressive tax. You're in favour of regressive tax.
I'm not. The important thing is to be both progressive and green. If you can do both, then that's absolutely the right thing to do. But the critical thing looking at this winter is his life and death. Owen is dead right. It will be life and death for many people. And we have to tackle supply. It means creating the more creation of energy from within these shores, but it also means making sure we regulate and regulate now, because within the profit margins of the big six is the ability to cut bills for millions of people in this country.
Tim, you know as well, though, but of the bill, you know, of the sort of average dual fuel bill, about £1,300 a year, £50 of that is going to support the development of green renewable energies. £50. That's why we cannot let David Cameron off the hook by blaming these green levies when the bigger issue is tackling the energy companies. And we need reform of that market, and our policy is to get rid of the present regulator and establish a tougher energy watchdog.
I think we've covered the point. Just want to hear one or two members of the audience, then we'll go on. You say in the front here. Just a point you'd like to make.
We've heard in the news that Ed Miliband wants to put a temporary freeze on bills, and we've heard that John Major wants to put a windfall tax.
Right.
But shouldn't we maybe cap the increase, the energy companies'
proper regulation?
Maybe
proper regulation
at the rate of inflation, something rather than 8, 9, 10%.
They'll always put the interest of profit in front of the consumers. That's why we just can't allow the big six to keep strangling like this. It's blackmail, effectively. Just before we leave the point, Liz Truss,
Is it in the power of the control Ofgem to say, you bring those prices down, as a matter of fact?
Well, they could.
We won't accept
They could
10%.
do that, and we did have RPI minus X regulation in the industry. The issue is that we don't control international gas and oil prices. Those go up and down. And Ed Miliband has admitted that his Fairy Godmother Act wouldn't work if international prices went up.
OK, but...
the point is that if you cap prices and prices go up internationally, then you end up with the 3-day week and the lights going off. So what we need to do is enable investment into our industry and encourage investment. You didn't do the investment. You didn't do the investment, Caroline.
And they have gone down. We believe a tough energy watchdog should have the power to ensure that the energy companies, not just the big six, pass those reductions on to consumers, because we all know when they go up, they go on our bills.
You know what, you can do
Thank
that.
you very much.
You can do that now. You can do that now.
We are
Thank you
doing
very
that
much.
now.
Thank you. We'll move on to another topic, because that's the third time in 4 weeks we've discussed this, and each time brings out something new, but I don't want to stay on it for too long. Of course, if you're listening at home and want to comment, I'm sure you may want to comment, you can text us or you can Twitter, both at your command. Our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. Or you can text comments to 83981 and the red button will tell you what other people commenting are saying. Right, I want to take a question, please, from... we'll take a question from Helen O'Brien, please.
Is spying on our allies ever acceptable?
This is in the light of Angela Merkel's complaint to President Obama that she was being spied on. And it turns out now that 35, I'm told, according to tomorrow's Guardian, 35 heads of state are being spied on by the Americans. Is it acceptable, Caroline Flint?
No, I don't think it's acceptable to use surveillance in a way which is spying on people who are our allies, who work with us through international organisations, both on defence and on other matters as well. I don't think it's acceptable.
Why did Labour spy on the G20 participants then in the conference in 2009?
Well, I'm just saying, I think unless there is a threat to our security, I think you have to have a rationale for this, and I don't think sort of just fishing trips for spying in that way is the right thing to do. And our security services, let me say, do a fantastic job for us in all sorts of ways to help keep us safe, but there have to be rules within that and how they operate. And next week, for the first time, the heads of MI5, MI6 and GCHQ are going to give public evidence to the Intelligence Committee at the House of Commons. But there have to be rules around this. And I think it's quite right that Angela Merkel is aggrieved at what she's found out.
What do you think they were trying to find out?
That's a good question, because the whole rationale for spying, which I think lots of us, or security services, which few would quibble, is to protect our security, stop us being blown up on buses. I think last time I checked, Angela Merkel wasn't likely to sign up to international terrorism. Neither was, for example, the Mexican president, who was also apparently spied on, and apparently that was actually for industrial espionage, effectively. It was the US spying on them for those reasons. I think there needs to be a wider debate about this, and actually I think it's welcome the likes of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, who I think are genuine American heroes, because what they've done is they've shone a light on the dark recesses of power, how extensive this spying is. They've revealed secrets like the fact, for example, some of the outrageous things that have happened in Iraq because of the American occupation. The results, for example, of drone attacks in Pakistan, which are increasing the risk of terrorism, not reducing it. And instead, what we should be doing is, instead of having this spying on allies, on ordinary people as well, who are law-abiding people going about their own business, we should make sure the security services are accountable, that they don't have this argument, they're protecting our liberty, therefore they can do exactly what they want, and we actually have an accountable security service, and we actually have freedom of information to know exactly the sorts of things they're doing in our lives.
All right. Peter Hitchens. The question was, is spying on our allies ever acceptable?
Well, the first problem is that our allies today might be our enemies tomorrow, and also that people who appear to be our allies might be our rivals. I think you'll find that an awful lot of intelligence work is commercial and industrial, not military. And I think that that's where much of it is concentrated. If you don't want your country to have that kind of information, then of course you can take a moral decision and say we're not going to do it.
But what do they want to know about Angela Merkel?
I don't know what they want to know about.
What would you want to know about Angela Merkel?
Actually, there's almost nothing I want to know about Angela Merkel, except how on earth it was that her family came to move to East Germany, which has always puzzled me, but, when everybody else is trying to get out. But leaving that aside, only her tapping her telephone is going to discover that. I think it's much more worrying that not that politicians, who ought, I think, reasonably to assume that somebody is probably trying to tap their telephones all the time anyway, not that politicians are having their telephones tapped, but that ordinary citizens are having their telephones tapped and their emails registered and read by people who have no business doing so. That does outrage me.
OK, man in the check shirt there.
Yeah, when the journalists were found to have hacked into the phones of politicians like John Prescott, they were hung, drawn and quartered. Regulation was bandied round. Everybody went to town on them. I agree that what they did was completely wrong and it was overreaching to the nth degree. But why should we feel any different when politicians are the victims than when the general public are the victims and it's the politicians who are actually initiating it?
Liz, do you think the politicians are initiating in the sense that he means, agreeing to it, planning?
Well, in this country, any activity of that kind, surveillance activity, ultimately has to be signed off by the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary, and I think that's right, because it is, you know, a very important matter.
So when we spied on the G20 participants, that had been agreed by Labour's Home Secretary?
Well, that's certainly the case under our government, that it does have to have senior-level sign-off within government. I mean, I think the difficulty here is we're dealing with a much more complex world than we were in the Cold War, where it was clear who the enemies were and where they were. Now we have terrorist networks embedded in our own country, embedded in other countries. It may be somebody who looks entirely innocent. And I'm very worried about the way that GCHQ operates being exposed in public, so those terrorists find out about the nature of the surveillance that's going on. I mean, we now have a much more open world. Technology makes it much easier to share secrets. It's much easier to get those things out. And our law enforcement agencies do, I think, have to have the power to be able to deal with those threats as they arise. Otherwise, we will all be in serious danger.
Do they do themselves any
service?
Do they do themselves any service by tapping Angela
Look, I'm
Merkel's
absolutely not defending
telephone?
Angela Merkel's telephone being tapped. And I have to say, if anyone tapped the telephones at the Department of Education, they wouldn't find anything more interesting than what's in the new maths GCSE.
Heads of state. These are not terrorists. Terrorism is being used as a pretext to do this. You're talking about the Brazilian Prime Minister, the head of Germany, you know.
I'm not defending heads of states' telephones being tapped. What I'm doing is responding to Owen's point about the secrets being put out in the public domain about how we find out about these activities, because we are in serious danger from very worrying terrorist networks.
Also in danger of having our hard-won liberties and freedoms, which our ancestors fought for at great cost and sacrifice, being taken away from us using the pretext of terrorism. We must not let that happen.
The man in the red shirt there, and then I'll come to you. Man in the red shirt there.
It's about time our government started standing up for the people of this country, instead of sending them backwards for the Americans all the time. Every time we listen to the government, you've got the same rubbish all the time. We need to start standing up to the Americans, start, fighting back, and stop cutting our armed forces as well.
OK, and you, sir, here.
To expand on what the gentleman said up there, I'm quite worried about how long until the EU countries start pointing the finger at us. It's been known for a while that GCHQ has a close working relationship with the NSA, so we don't know how far they're going. I mean, it's in all likelihood this is happening.
Tim Farron?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why Angela Merkel moved to East Germany. Maybe she's another former communist who moved to the right. I don't know. But the point is, this was not just intelligence gathering. This is tapping the phone of a friendly head of state. Now, let's just ignore for a moment, and I'll come to the civil liberties issue in a minute, how utterly stupid is that? And whatever gain that the US thought they might get from this was always going to be completely outweighed by the damage it has done to the diplomatic diplomatic relations between two very, very important countries. The post-war effort through the European Union, through NATO, the United Nations, G8, G20 more recently, in bringing countries together, sharing interests to make sure that we don't go to war again, is undermined by stupid, reckless decisions like this. And it forms part of a culture that runs through certainly the US administration and has run through the administration before this one in this country, where we think people's civil liberties are not as important as whatever the agenda of the political leaders of the day happen to be.
Okay. I'll take a couple more points and then we'll go to another question. The man in spectacles there.
I think when you get into the realm of spying, I think we're fooling ourselves that we think this is the first time that allies have spied on allies. Yes. I'm pretty sure that the British spied on the Americans before they came into the Second World War. I can't quote anything or clarify that, but I just think once you get into the realms of sort of spying, well, yeah, it's just spies will be spies, and that is not to kind of give an excuse to them. But I'm just saying, once you get into that, you know, they've got all this technology. I think they've been greedy. They're spoilt for choice, and they've tapped Angela Merkel's phone because they can simply, you know. And this is going to fall back on them. It's going to blow back on them now.
Okay, and the man in the check shirt there with.
I think any time you sacrifice liberty for security, it's a recipe for disaster, flat out.
Anytime you sacrifice what, sorry?
Liberty for security.
Yeah.
And, like the other people were saying with the spying going on, it's just been going on for years, and the only difference is now that you're telling us about it.
OK. Good. Let's go on. Thank you very much. Vikas Pai, please. Question from Vikas Pai. He's a nuclear engineer, I think.
Yeah.
Mr. Pai.
The question is, what is wrong in having unqualified teachers in free schools if they are qualified enough in the subject they teach?
This is the row about free schools, which are pretty well the same as academy schools, between two sides of your party, it seems, because you all said it was a good idea to have free schools with unqualified teachers, and David Laws said how brilliant the unqualified teachers were, and suddenly Nick Clegg's saying, oh no, they've all got to be qualified in future. What's wrong with having unqualified teachers if they're good enough at the subjects they teach?
There's quite a lot wrong with it, actually. I agree with the proposals and the policies of this government in terms of the decision to give teachers and head teachers far more freedom and autonomy. That is absolutely right. And it's right to use experts in the classroom to bring them in. I mean, use Lord Sugar to talk about business on a one-off occasion. You know, for your PE lessons, bring in Luis Suarez. Just don't let him teach a course in citizenship. You know, when I worked in higher education for 13 years before I became an MP, and so I don't want to offend everybody I used to work with, but one of the problems we've been moving away from in universities is that we had people with PhDs coming out of their ears who are complete experts, research leaders of the best kind, geniuses, and some of them incapable of communicating that genius to anybody else. And it's no good being a brilliant expert if you can't teach.
And what about if you're a brilliant expert and you can teach?
If you're a brilliant expert and you can teach, then don't undermine the teaching profession by not taking the qualification. I'm quite happy for people to be taken on by a free school or academy and without a qualification, so long as they learn and do it on the job. That is, I mean, what we need to remember is being an expert is a good thing, but being a qualified teacher is also an incredibly good thing. Our teachers are fantastic, they are trained, and we undermine the entire profession and damage our children if we throw away the importance of having a qualified teacher in the classroom.
So what's going on in your... What's going on in your party? Because you signed up to this policy in part of the coalition. Then David Laws comes in as the schools minister, and he says the exact opposite of what you've just said. Now you as president say what you've just said, and your leader says something else. I mean, what's going on? You seem to be all over the shop.
I'm not of the view that we are. I mean, David Laws defended the free schools.
You said there are plenty of teachers who may not have formal qualifications, but who do a superb job. And exact opposite of what you just said.
And in a specific instance, and you can say you bring somebody into a class and use them as an expert, most of us on this panel have probably done that.
You know that's not how it's happened. You know it's not like that.
But my take is, and Nick Clegg's take, and it's been repeated again today, is that you must not undermine the teaching profession. This is not about the ideology about whether it's right or wrong. This is about the experience of our children in our schools.
Yeah, but which Liberal Democrat do you listen to seems to be the problem.
Children in our schools deserve to be taught by people who know what they're doing and are capable of teaching.
Liz Truss. Well, you're the children's minister.
I think we have to look at why we're doing this. We've just had a report from the OECD which says we have some of the lowest rates of literacy and numeracy in our population compared to other countries. We need to make sure that our children get the skills they need at school so they can go and get good jobs. And we're not doing that at the moment. That's why we're raising standards in GCSEs. That's why we're changing the curriculum to make it more effective. And that's why we're enabling academies and free schools to have those freedoms so they can deliver. And all the evidence is they are delivering. Academies are performing better than equivalent maintained schools. Free schools are getting better Ofsted reports than other schools are. And it's because they have those freedoms that schools like independent schools, which of course the Deputy Prime Minister went to, have, that they're able to do that. They're able to bring in the experts, they're able to bring in the great physics teachers, the great engineers and the great artists. And ultimately, Ofsted goes and inspects those schools to make sure teaching is up to scratch. And if it's not, we haul them in pretty quickly. And we've also got the exam results to judge by how well those schools are doing. But we need to do something serious to reform education in this country, because we know that education is vitally important for the economy, but we know that we're not getting enough talented people with the skills they need.
All right.
And one of the things that motivates me so much in this cause is I grew up in Leeds, I went to a comprehensive school. I, like Owen, got into Oxford. But I was one of only a few children to be able to do that. Yes. And we need to make sure that we don't waste our talent. We've got so many talented young people, and we're not giving them the education they deserve. And we do need radical reform.
And unqualified teachers is the way to do it. That was the question.
Well, no, giving head teachers the power to hire the best possible person. Right. Whether they're a great teacher, a great mathematician, is the way to do it.
Thank you. Owen Jones. We'll come back to him. Owen Jones.
Well, firstly, I don't want to be too brutal on the Liberal Democrats. They've done so many U-turns and policy shifts, Tim. I mean, you must be so dizzy, I'm surprised you can even walk, frankly. But,
I've changed nothing.
In terms of, well, I mean, often you have the kind of, rhetoric of Tony Benn and the voting record of George Osborne. But in terms of the actual specifics of the free schools, I think in terms of Finland, for example, they've got one of the best education systems in the whole world, and they train up their teachers to the best possible degree. There's a difference between knowing how to teach and being an expert in your particular field. What free schools are doing, in my view, and I'm a person like yourself, proudly comprehensively educated, my primary school's in the bottom 5% by results. I was the only boy to go to university. As far as I know, more ended up in prison. That wasn't because I was brighter, it's because I had odds stacked in my favour from day one. If you look at the gap in vocabulary at the age of 5, between an affluent and a poor child, it's 18 months. If you look at the impact of diet, poor kids turning up hungry, if you look at the impact of housing and the stresses that has on education, or poor health, these are the issues that are really driving divisions in our educational system, not the structure of schools. And free schools, frankly, on average, and we've seen in 2011, they're less likely to take in kids from free school meals. They're sucking resources from other schools. Yes, they are. And they're going in areas often where there's a surplus of places. Let's stop scapegoating comprehensive education for all the ills of society. Let's wage war on the causes of education inequality, not the symptoms. And let's build an educational system we can all be proud of.
I want to go back to the questioner, Vikas Pai. He's got his hand up there. Mr. Pai.
Well, my thinking is, if you are passionate about science, passionate about mathematics, and you have a degree in mathematics and science to back it up, you can teach.
You can. Okay. Peter Hitchens.
I don't know what the evidence is that our current system of teacher training is particularly successful in training teachers. As far as I know, it was introduced in the days of Harold Wilson. And before then, we had rather effective state schools called grammar schools, which have been subsequently abolished in an act of extraordinary spite. I think it's also true that the independent schools do not have the requirement that the most state schools have to employ teachers who've gone through the ordinary teacher training system.
It's different. They're privileged people from privileged educated backgrounds. We don't start from the same place and live people.
I'll carry on if I might. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the fact that someone has a qualification doesn't necessarily make them a good teacher any more than anything else does. What makes them a good teacher is that ability to teach, the desire to communicate, which some people have, some people don't, and that has to be sorted out actually in practice, as all of us found at school, with the teachers who inspired us and the teachers who didn't. What you really need to worry about, most of all, is making sure that those children who at the moment are denied access to good education because their parents aren't rich, have access to good education, and I think a lot of that good education will be provided by teachers who don't have formal teacher training qualifications. Free schools are a stunt and a gimmick, as are academies. There's no proof that academies are any better than comprehensives. Free schools will never, ever change the lives of most people. What all the parties need to do is to admit that they made a catastrophic mistake in 1965 by abolishing selection by ability and bring it back. Those people who sit on this panel and say they went to comprehensive schools, I think will for the most part turn out not to have gone to normal comprehensive schools, but to the kind of comprehensive schools that only some people can go to. How is it that they go to them? Generally because their parents lived in areas that other people couldn't afford to live in. That is selection by money. That is selection by money. And it is very, very unfair, and it's quite extraordinary that parties which claim to be in favour of improving the situation of the poor constantly refuse to reintroduce a system which selects by ability and which is therefore fair.
Peter, we have it in Kent, and poorer kids are less likely to do well in Kent, where selection is still in place.
I think you're all if you want to,
distorted because it's so.
Wait a minute. I want to bring Caroline Flint in, because she hasn't yet spoken on this. But just before we do, your comprehensive school in an prosperous middle-class area?
No,
or
I grew up in Kale Green in Stockport. My primary school was in the bottom 5%. My secondary school was above the national average. My sixth form was below the national average. I went to Ridge Daniel sixth form.
Enough.
I went to a whole tour comprehensive school.
The comprehensive I went to was an average comprehensive in Leeds.
Well, round, eh?
I checked once with a mate of mine, and out of the people of my year, 5 went to prison, 4 went to university.
All right. Well, that was a good school then. That got them going.
We were a bad year. My sisters were quite good.
The old boys reunions say. Caroline Flint, you go to?
I went to a comprehensive school in Twickenham in London. My children all went to comprehensive school in Doncaster.
Twickenham is a middle-class area, of course.
Yeah, it is a more middle-class area, I suppose. Yes. But, you know, I'm not from a middle-class family. It was a former grammar school. And what I would say is, whenever we have these conversations about how good the grammars were, only a few young people got the benefit. Secondary Modern wrote off generations of young people and did nothing for them.
Let's come to
Can I come to the free schools?
Come to the free schools.
There are 174 free schools. There are over 21,000 state schools, and the amount of time we're spending on free schools seems completely a ridiculous amount of time for the government to do. And on the issue of unqualified teachers, look, I know from my own children's education, we had sports people, we had other people come in who did master classes, who worked alongside the teachers. And we've always had that provision in the state school system to utilise that skill. But I believe strongly that actually we should support qualifications for teachers. And if that means we bring people in from industry or from the army or elsewhere, they can come in, but they should qualify. And let's listen to the examples of what's happened recently. The Al Medina School in Derby had unqualified teachers. Kids with special needs were not being attended to. In Pimlico, a 27-year-old was put in charge of that school with no qualification for teaching, no management experience, and walked. And this is what is going on with this free school policy. And I'm afraid to say, Tim, that when Labour put forward some restrictions on the legislation around the use of unqualified teachers, I don't know what you did, but Nick Clegg didn't support Labour on that. And now, once again, we've seen, when the going gets tough, he walks and tries to cover himself in glory.
Thank you. I'm going to take just a couple more points. The woman in yellow there.
As a teacher myself, I'm absolutely disgusted that it's acceptable for people not to be trained. It is a profession.
Yeah.
You know, other professions aren't treated like that.
Let's go on. Other professions, you were saying?
Other professions are treated with a lot more respect than teachers, and it's, you know, it seems to be have a go at teachers all the time.
Exactly.
Anyone can teach. That's what people think.
And you think...
It's a very, very difficult job.
You can't teach until you've been taught
You
how
need
to
to be
teach.
trained how to teach.
All right.
I agree.
And you waving your hand there rather aggressively.
I just want to say I have a PhD and I'm incredibly passionate about my subject, but I still think that I should be qualified, and it brings the whole reputation of the job into question if we can't make sure that people have minimum qualifications.
What's your PhD in?
In classics, and I'm really passionate. People should study Greek and Latin.
And do you teach it?
Yeah, I do, and I go into schools, and I still don't think that I'm so brilliant that I can then just teach. I go into schools and I volunteer, but I would still do a PGCE if I actually became a teacher.
Right.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to keep moving. Will Charlton, please. Question from Will Charlton.
As politicians and political commentators, would you say what would you say to those who may feel disillusioned with the current political system?
And you know well, I mean, anybody watching this programme and listening to the audiences know that there is a great disillusion with everybody involved in politics. So as politicians and political commentators, what would you say to people who feel disillusioned? Owen Jones, you kick off.
I'm very passionate about this. I think there's a huge disconnect with politics and ordinary people in this country. I think that's partly because politics is increasingly being treated not as a duty, not as a service, but as a profession, where you increasingly get politicians who've never had a job outside the Westminster bubble, where you get a situation where, if you look at the background of MPs, they're increasingly not drawn from a working-class background. Actually, Caroline's actually an exception, really, if you look at MPs, because over two-thirds of MPs are now from professional, middle-class backgrounds. I think this has a consequence because it means MPs can't relate to people and their everyday issues. I'll give you one example, and I don't often quote Hazel Blairs, I'll be honest with you, but I interviewed Hazel Blairs before the last election. I said, Hazel, 5 million people stuck on social housing waiting lists in this country. Why didn't Labour do anything about it? She said, to her credit, very candidly, there just wasn't anyone in government who was interested in housing. But if you had people who'd been stuck in a social housing waiting list, or someone in their community or in their family, and you got those people into Parliament, those issues would be far more likely to be addressed.
How do you get them into Parliament?
Well, traditionally the route was trade unions and local government, because what they did is they trained up working class people, they gave them a political education, and those routes have been attacked. But as well as that, I beg people, and I really want to emphasise this point, politics is not just the soap opera at the top. It's not about Parliament. When we look at all the things we won throughout history, whether it be women's rights, LGBT rights, workers' rights, it wasn't won because of the goodwill and generosity of those above. It's because ordinary people, our ancestors, our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers, they got out there, often faceless, airbrushed out of history, ignored. They got out there and they fought and they made their voice heard. And we stand as a country on the shoulders of giants. We owe all of our gains, all of our rights to those people. So don't just let politicians be the one, if you like, who pass all these laws. We just passively stop. Get out there, be organised and make your voice heard. That is a proud tradition in this country.
So you're going to stand for Parliament then?
No, I'm not going to stand for Parliament. And I actually want people...
not going to take
I want
your own
people
medicine.
outside the Westminster bubble. I want actual people like people here to stand and put themselves forward. And I think they're careerists for doing so. They're not.
Peter Hitchens, those who feel disillusioned with the current political system, what would you say?
Are right to do so. They have been systematically betrayed, and I see no end to it. There are so many issues which have been visited on this country by an elite of self-selecting, closed-minded people, well represented here this evening, and actually largely incompetent as well, which have done enormous damage to our way of life. So, for instance, who now has anything to say about the deindustrialisation of this country and the destruction of manufacturing jobs under the Thatcher government? Who can reverse it? Who can do anything about it? Who will say anything on this panel about the catastrophe of mass immigration, which has changed this country irrevocably into somewhere completely different from what it was? They won't talk about it. They won't talk seriously about the immense problems of crime and disorder, which affect millions of people in their homes and leave them utterly vulnerable to all kinds of unpleasantness and violence and menace, which they never used to have to undergo. And there is no sense whatsoever that there will be any reform of the criminal justice system or any attempt to put it right again. These are just some of the subjects on which this elite just constantly refuse to discuss.
Why?
Why? Because they themselves have an ideology. They themselves have the ideology of metropolitan bourgeois bohemians. They despise most people outside.
What are you, man of the people?
They despise. Well,
I mean, you're the only person on this panel who
I'm no more a man of the people than you are.
I don't claim to be, but you're making a picture on here.
I'm simply saying these are the things which they will not do anything about, which they will not do, because they themselves benefit. They themselves benefit from many of the things which do immense damage. They've benefited from globalisation. They've benefited from mass immigration.
Let's talk about mass immigration. Let's talk about immigrants coming over here, propping up our NHS, treating us when we're ill.
They're not affected. Their children don't go to bog standard comprehensives. They're not affected. They're not affected by crime. Yes, I do know how I'm talking about because I know what they do all the time. They will not discuss these things. They will not do anything about them. They ignore what you say, and you think that at general election time you can do something about it. No, the people who stand before you at general election time for the political parties are people who've been pre-selected. You have no control. If I stood for Parliament, or if he stood for Parliament, from our positions, which are quite popular, the fact is the party machines would erase us. The immense amounts of money they're capable of spending, the enormous access they have to the broadcasting organisations, which we don't have most of the time, would make it impossible.
You've got more access than I have, Peter.
Would make it impossible. On the contrary, would make it impossible for anyone outside the Conservative
Peter, sorry,
to
the question was, what would you say to people who feel like you clearly do
what
about
I've just
the kind
said.
of political association?
I just said it.
Well, no, wait a moment. What would you say to them about how to change things? Are you going to stand as an MP?
I'm sorry.
Are you going to stand as an MP?
No, because for the reasons I've just explained, I wouldn't have the faintest chance. No, my advice to anybody young enough to do so is to emigrate before it's too late.
Oh, for goodness sake.
I mean, this is just...
The paper that hates Britain, you heard it here.
This is a ridiculous council of despair. I think our country's best days are ahead of us, not behind us. And I think Peter Hitchens needs to get with the programme. I got involved in politics, actually, through my mum, who was a member of the CND and used to take me on CND marches. Oh, wow. And I thought this is interesting, exciting. It was the 1980s. There was a big debate about ideas. And I think that, you know, if you want to be involved in politics, you can be involved in politics. And I want more people to be involved in politics. I think we should make Parliament more open, more easier to access, more friendly to people from different backgrounds. I think it is becoming quite an elite of a particular type of professional. I think that's a problem. We need to think about the way it operates, the terms and conditions, all those kind of things. I'm excited by the primaries that we've done in the Conservative Party to get a wider group of people involved in politics. We need to revive local... No, we've got some new ones coming up, actually, David. Maybe question time might be involved. But what we need to do is we need to open up politics. We need to make local government count through localism so that people are involved. But this idea that everything is always awful, that's one of the reasons why people turn off politics, because they just hear this constant moaning.
The Daily Mail might call you the man who hates Britain, after what you just said.
Exactly,
the Ed Miliband of our day.
Feel free to call me.
I mean, it's not the Ed, the Rafe Miliband.
It's not Britain I hate, Britain I love, every field and hedgerow. It's the people who run it.
Or the people who live here.
And who are wrecking it. And so, like anybody who cares about his country, I'm distressed by it. I see no hope from these interchangeable people. She was a Liberal Democrat. For all I know, she still is.
Let's hear from
the Conservative Party.
Let's hear from
I know I was, but I'm not anymore. You are a Liberal Democrat.
The person in the second row there. That's you, sir. Yes.
Hi, I'm 19, and so I haven't had the chance to vote yet. I missed the last general election, and unfortunately missed the Welsh referendum as well. And I guess, going back to the disenchantment point, I guess I hate to use the argument that they're all the same, or that they're all liars, but I feel as though, coming from a Labour background myself, I feel as though there is really no difference in itself. They've become, I'd hate to say it, but a centre-right party. I wish there was a new party on the left, but I feel as though they would never stand a chance with this private party of three big groups.
All right.
And I wish someone would address that.
OK, and the person behind you in the yellow shirt, and then I'll come to you over here on the right. Yes.
One point of view is that the trade unions represent the common people, the common man. Wouldn't it be a good idea if the trade unions put forward their elected people to represent
I rather thought that's what they're accused of doing, but I don't know. The man on the right, yeah. You said no to the man on your left, yes.
One of the ways in which we measure political disillusion is by analysing voter turnout at elections. This has been very low in recent times.
Yes.
Perhaps we could do something practical about it by having elections on Sundays instead of Thursdays, as they do in some other European countries.
I'm not sure that would change the view of politicians, would it?
People don't.
More people would vote. No, hang on.
People don't vote because they don't like what's being offered to them.
Tim, you're going. We've got a couple of minutes. Tim Farron.
I mean, just before I answer the question, we've just got to get away from this nonsense that is peddled by Peter and people like him, that immigration is some kind of curse in this country. It is a blessing. It has made... And if you want to look at the hard fact, it is worth £7 billion a year to our economy, never mind anything else. But are people disillusioned with politics, and they should be? I mean, people are disillusioned with it, and I'm often myself sometimes, if I'm honest with you. I joined the Liberals when I was 16. I joined Shelter first. I watched Cathy come home, and it made me cry. That's how I got involved in politics, because something got me in my gut. People do vote, but they don't join political parties anymore. And I saw around me in the 1980s, a bit further north than here, half the parents of the kids in my class, including sometimes my own, out of work and out of hope and despairing, and the waste of those lives. And I thought, well, I can either sit back and let that happen, or I can get involved and I can try and do something about it. And I joined the Liberals not as a career move. I'd have been flipping stupid if I had. It was not exactly a glittering route to future in politics.
We're talking about people's view of you, not your view of yourself.
What I'm saying,
We've heard a lot about you, but what about people's view of you?
All I'm saying is, for everybody else, don't get involved in politics because you want to become a member of Parliament. Right. That's not why I got involved in it. I just thought the world is a grim place, or it's grimmer than it could be, and we can make a difference, and you'll make certain that people like Peter are proved right if you don't get involved in politics.
You're part of the problem, because the Liberal Democrats inspired, to their credit, hundreds of thousands of people for the last election, and then they betrayed them on every single pledge. And those people will never trust a politician ever again because of what you did.
No.
It undermined democracy.
Not peace, but silence. Silence. Caroline Flint.
I think there's lots of examples where we have let ourselves down as politicians, and you therefore can't blame people for being cynical about what they've seen. But, you know, when I joined the Labour Party at FE College, it was because there was a Labour club at the Further Education College. I'd never met an MP in my life, and I joined because I wanted to change things. I looked at my own family, and I felt as passionately then as I do now that your chance in life should be determined by the family you come from and the wealth that you have. Everybody has a chance to succeed, and that's why I joined the Labour Party. But I also accept, after many years now in politics, that we shouldn't become complacent about how we operate. And for me, one of the most enjoyable parts of being a Member of Parliament is living in Doncaster and going down on the train to the House of Commons on a Monday, coming back on a Thursday night, and being where my constituents are and doing the best I can for them. And for me, that is about the connection. You said about the political system. We have a system here where, because of the constituency link, you can actually see what the laws in Westminster do to the lives of people in our
constituency. So if everybody was like you, nobody would be disillusioned.
No, I'm not saying that. I think it's a positive part of what MPs do, and long should that continue.
Everybody will be disillusioned with question time. We've got so many hands up, and I've been told I've got to stop. Very quickly. You have to be very, very quick.
Quick, thank you. I just want to say that I am one of the thousands that is very disillusioned. I've always voted Liberal. Exactly, Owen. I did feel completely betrayed after the last election. I did selfishly want to live through a coalition, but I had hoped it would be with Labour, not with the Tory party. I don't know where I would vote exactly now. All I know is I wouldn't vote for the Tories with the wreck that you are making of our education system.
Anyway, that's dishing it out all round. Our time's up, I'm afraid. Next week we're going to be in St Austell, in Cornwall. Week after that we're in Boston, in Lincolnshire. And to take part, put questions to the panel, usual stuff, apply via our website there. There's the address, which is the best way to do it, frankly. You can telephone 0330 123 9988. But the website just is probably the best way, and there's a form to fill in. If you're on BBC Radio 5 Live listening to this, the debate goes on Question Time, Extra Time with Steve Nolan and John Pienaar, but for us here on television it comes to an end. My thanks to our panel, to our audience here in Liverpool. Thank you all very much for coming. Until next Thursday in St Austell from Question Time, good night.
So, as David said, don't forget Question Time, Extra Time now, with the chance to continue the debate on BBC Radio 5 Live. Here on BBC One next, Andrew Neil with This Week.